Enjoy this narrated virtual tour of World War II-era foreign aircraft exhibited at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. The museum is located on the Wright Patterson Air Force Base in southwest Ohio. See the planes that fought in the European and Pacific theaters during the Second World War. During World War II, most Royal Air Force pilots trained in the de Havilland DH-82A Tiger Moths, including Americans who flew with the Eagle squadrons before the United States entered the war. In the United Kingdom, Tiger Moths performed a variety of roles in addition to that of primary trainer. Some aircraft were even outfitted to function as armed light bombers. The beautifully restored Tiger Moth on display has won numerous trophies at airshows. American pilots were recruited to fly British aircraft including the Hawker Hurricane against German forces early in World War II. Hurricanes inflicted 60% of Luftwaffe losses during the Battle of Britain. From January 1941 until they were absorbed into the U.S. Army Air Force, these pilots fought valiantly and successfully against German aircraft over England and the continent. Hawker Hurricanes absorbed the brunt of the German air attacks until a faster, more maneuverable Spitfire was available. The Hawker Hurricane on display is a Canadian-built airframe painted to represent an aircraft of the Royal Air Force's 71 Squadron. Equipped with a very early airborne intercept radar, the powerful and heavily armed night fighter version of the Bristol Beaufighter entered service just as the Luftwaffe began its Blitz night attacks against London. U.S. night fighter squadrons received more than 100 reverse Lend-Lease Bristol Beaufighters in 1943. It filled the U.S. Army Air Force need for an effective night fighter until an American aircraft could be produced. They conducted daytime convoy escort and strike missions through the summer, but thereafter flew primarily at night. Beaufighters flew night cover for Allied forces in Italy and France until the closing days of the war. This aircraft is marked as the Beaufighter flown by Captain Harold Augsburger, commander of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron, who shot down an HE-111 carrying German staff officers in September 1944. De Havilland's DH98 Mosquitoes flew in several U.S. Army Air Force units as photographic and weather reconnaissance aircraft and as night fighters. These British planes were turned over to the U.S. under reverse Lend-Lease. Just before D-Day, black and white stripes were applied to a vast majority of U.S. and British aircraft to clearly identify them during the Normandy landings. This Mosquito was restored to a Mk16 configuration and painted as a weather reconnaissance aircraft of the 653rd Bombardment Squadron based in England in 1944 to 1945. Supermarine Spitfire Mk5Cs equipped Eagle squadrons composed of American volunteers flying for the RAF. It introduced the universal wing which could be fitted with various combinations of armament, including 4 20mm cannon and 4.303 machine guns. It could carry 2 250-pound bombs or 1 500-pound bomb. The U.S. 31st and 52nd Fighter Groups first flew them during Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. The Spitfire on display served with the Royal Australian Air Force. Supermarine Spitfire Mark 11 was essentially a Mark 9 interceptor modified for photographic reconnaissance. All guns and armor were replaced with cameras and the fuel capacity was greatly increased. Speed was their defense. The U.S. 14th Photographic Squadron operated them from November 1943 to April 1945, flying hazardous long-range reconnaissance missions over mainland Europe. This aircraft is painted as a 14th Photographic Squadron Mark 11 at Mount Farm Airfield in England. The Bf-109B first entered combat with German manned Condor Legion units during the Spanish Civil War, and they were a welcome replacement for the obsolete Heinkel He-51 biplane fighters. At the beginning of World War II, the Messerschmitt's Bf-109 completely dominated the Polish PZL fighters and the British Hawker Hurricanes. The Battle of Britain uncovered its short-range Achilles heel and exposed it to its equal, the Supermarine Spitfire. Its short range prevented it from escorting Luftwaffe bombers past London, leaving the greater part of the British Isles free from enemy attack on training and production sites. The museum's aircraft is painted to represent a plane from Jagdgeschwader 300, a unit that defended Germany against Allied bombers. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was one of Germany's best fighter airplanes at the start of World War II. It appeared in action over northwestern France in September 1941 and rapidly proved its superiority over the Mark V Spitfire, Britain's best fighter of that time. It was used as a day fighter, fighter-bomber, ground attack aircraft and to a lesser degree night fighter. The displayed aircraft was assigned to the JG-3 Uechtgeschwader, one of the Luftwaffe's most famous fighter units. The German Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet was a rocket-powered defensive fighter. The Comet's rocket engine gave it an exceptional climb rate, but range was severely limited by its high fuel consumption. The fuels used were hazardous and sometimes exploded without warning, killing several pilots. The sole operational Comet group scored 9 kills while losing 14 of its own aircraft. This Me-163B may have been sabotaged while under construction, perhaps by the forced laborers building it in Germany. A small stone was wedged between the fuselage fuel tank and a supporting strap which could have eventually caused a dangerous fuel leak, and there was contaminated glue in the wing structure which could have caused a failure of the wing in flight. Messerschmitt's Me-262 Schwalbe was the world's first operational turbojet aircraft. U.S. Army Air Force bombers destroyed hundreds of Me-262s on the ground. Of the more than 1,400 produced, fewer than 300 saw combat. When able to get airborne, the German jets scored heavily against Allied bomber formations, but most Me-262s did not make it to operational units because of the destruction of Germany's surface transportation system. Many of those that did were unable to fly because of lack of fuel spare parts or trained pilots. The displayed aircraft is painted as an aircraft that has just left the production line without operational unit markings. The German Junkers Ju-88 was one of World War II's most versatile airplanes. It operated in nearly every combat role, including dive bomber, level bomber, night fighter, day interceptor, photographic reconnaissance, tank destroyer and even as an unpiloted missile. More than 15,000 Ju-88s were built in dozens of variants, more than any other twin-engine German aircraft of the period. This aircraft is displayed as a long-range photographic reconnaissance version modified for tropical use. The Mitsubishi Zero is the most famous Japanese air power symbol of World War II. It was designed as a carrier-borne fighter and it was exceptionally light compared to its opponents. Allied aircraft such as the Curtiss P-40 and Seversky P-35 were at a disadvantage in a dogfight with a Zero flown by a skilled pilot. Its negatives included omitting armor protection for the pilot, not using self-sealing fuel tanks, and building lightweight wings as an integral part of the fuselage. American pilots learned to stay out of dogfights, but instead use superior armament and hit-and-run tactics against the agile fighter. Beginning around October 1944 during the Battle for the Philippines, Zeros were used in kamikaze attacks. It is painted to represent a section leader's aircraft from the aircraft carrier Zuiho during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. The Kawasaki N1K2 was the best fighter used in significant numbers by the Japanese Navy during World War II. Known by the Allies as the George, this maneuverable, heavily armed fighter was a formidable opponent in the closing months of the war. Though heavier, it possessed surprisingly good maneuverability due to a mercury switch that automatically extended the flaps during turns. Unlike the Zero, the George could compete against the best late-war U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces fighters. They did little to stop high-altitude B-29 attacks because of its insufficient climbing ability. It is painted as an aircraft in the Yokosuka Kokutai, an evaluation and test unit, and is one of only 3 surviving restored examples in the world. Japan designed the MXY-7K1 Cherry Blossom Model 22 to teach pilots to drop from a Japanese Navy bomber and guide an aircraft at high speed into an Allied warship. This trainer version was carried aloft and then released for practice flights complete with a landing skid and flaps. It challenged novice pilots with its high-speed 130-mile-per-hour landing. Machi's MC-200 SATA was one of Italy's principal fighters during World War II. Its stability and a high-speed dive was exceptional, but it was underpowered and underarmed in comparison to its contemporaries. From the time Italy entered the Second World War until the signing of the Italian armistice, the MC-200 flew more operational sorties than any other Italian aircraft. The displayed aircraft has the markings of the 372nd Squadron of the Regia Aeronautica that it carried at the time of its capture. The Nordøen UC64 Norseman was a 10-place single-engine utility transport. The U.S. Army Air Force adopted the aircraft in 1942. Designed for and used in Arctic areas, the Norseman was also employed in Europe and the Pacific during the war. On December 15, 1944, a UC-64 with bandleader Glenn Miller on board disappeared on a flight from England to France. This aircraft is marked as an Alaska-based Norseman late in World War II. I hope you enjoyed this narrated virtual tour of the Air Force Museum's 4 and Second World War aircraft. If you would like to tour other galleries in this series, you will find convenient links in the description section below this video. Here are YouTube suggested links on a similar topic that you may enjoy viewing.